Hi, everybody. This is Gad Saad for the Sad Truth. Today was the last day of classes for this semester. My students presented their final projects. This is where they have to identify a research question, posit some hypotheses, conduct a literature review, develop the data collection instruments, collect the data, analyze the data, and then arrive to some meaningful conclusions. So it's a very intensive project. And it's always exciting to head off to the last class to see the works that they've been busily tackling throughout the semester. In any case, it's always wonderful to receive positive feedback from your students. I put in a tremendous amount of effort and work beyond the classroom, precisely because this project is so intense. And so much more than simply giving them the required office hours, I make myself available online. Sometimes they contact me through Skype, by phone. We meet at several other times outside of the regularly scheduled office hours. And so we end up developing a bond in that they get to interact with me much more than would typically occur in a class where the professor comes in, lectures, and otherwise there's no other contact. And so when the course ends, there's always this sort of, there's a relief that this from the students' parts and that they're done with the course. But there's also, I think, a two-way sadness because, as I said, you develop a two-way bond. And of course, I'm always so touched by all of the comments that students direct toward me as they say goodbye. And then, of course, some of them end up sending me emails where they express, these types of warm sentiments. Earlier today, I shared one such email, so I'd like to read it for you. Even though the student in question was happy to have her name released, I won't do so. So let me just read it to you. Hi, Dr. Saad. I didn't get the chance to talk to you at the end of class, but I wanted to let you know that I am so capitalized happy I took this course. It blew any expectations I had from taking a marketing elective, and it quickly became my favorite class I've taken at JMSB, John Molson School of Business, and one I will never forget. I feel it should be a required course, honestly! ! You're clearly passionate about your work and what you're teaching, which makes it refreshing to show up to class every day, and it gave me something to look forward to. I'd always come home after class and update my roommates on what we learned that day or some of the conversations we had. And one of my roommates even watches your YouTube videos with me now. There you go. Thank you for fighting for truth, and I respect everything you do! I'll be sure to keep in touch, and I'm also glad I took this class because it's shown me my interest in evolutionary psychology going forward. Again, thank you so much, and I wish you the best. I'll continue to watch your YouTube videos and read your tweets. What a lovely message. It makes all of the hard work throughout the semester totally worth it when you receive such messages of gratitude. I thought I would just briefly mention the topics. There were 7 projects this semester. I hope that I'll do the topics justice. I'll just read. I won't, of course, mention the students' names and so on, but I'll just want to give you a sense of the types of topics that end up being covered in my course. So the first group they conducted a content analysis of Instagram profiles to look at the manner by which men and women engage in sexual signaling. So men are more likely to use, say, high status brand names as part of their photos, whereas women are more likely to show off their bodies and so on. So using some very fundamental evolutionary principles, they conducted a content analysis of Instagram photos. Then there was the second group looked at gift-giving motives of homosexuals. So in this case, what they did is they took a paper of mine that I published with one of my former doctoral students, Tripat Gill. This is a paper from 2003, wherein we looked at sex differences in tactical versus situational motives when it comes to offering a gift to a romantic partner. So a tactical reason would be, I give her a gift to seduce her. That's a tactical reason. A situational reason would be, well, it was his or her birthday, so I gave him a gift. It's situational based. And so we had found that there were some clear sex differences when it came to tactical motives, but when it came to situational motives, there were no sex differences. And so what this group wanted to do was, in a sense, replicate our study, but using a homosexual sample. So that was the second group. The third group looked at how the presentation of food could affect how much you're willing to pay for the food, what you think the caloric content of the food might be, how much calories it contains, and the nutritional value of the food. And so what they did is they manipulated things like how messy the plate looks. So the ingredients, the actual content of the plate didn't change, but they manipulated various aesthetic cues like the symmetry. So for example, does our preference for symmetry, say when it comes to facial features, does that translate? Does symmetry somehow transfer to other domains outside of mating? And so they looked at how the presentation of food has a downstream effect on these variables that I just mentioned earlier. So that was the third group. Fourth group looked at cigarette consumption, cigarette smoking, as a Zahavian signal. So for those of you who may not know, a Zahavian signal is a costly signal. It's an honest signal. So the classic example is the peacock's tail, right? It is burdensome. It is extravagant. It is costly. It reduces the survivability, the likelihood of surviving of a peacock if he's got a big tail. But that's precisely because he has to signal to the hen, hey, look, despite this very burdensome tail, I'm still around. And so this is known as Zahavian signaling, after Zahavi, who was an Israeli ornithologist who looked at this type of signaling most famously with Arabian babblers. And so what they looked at is they conducted a study where they looked at, if you show the same person either with a cigarette or not, how will people evaluate the person for short-term mating context or long-term mating context and related issues. So that was the fourth study. Then there was the fifth study looked at prospect refuge theory in cafes. So prospect refuge is a evolutionary theory that posits that we have a evolved penchant to prefer landscapes that offer us prospect so that we could see far and wide, but that also afford us a refuge. And I've argued in some of my books that principle, which typically has been studied in the context of preference for natural landscapes, could be applied to man-made spaces, whether it be interior design, say cafes, hotel lobbies, malls, and other commercial settings. And so, the example I give is you could have a cafe that either, looks warm and inviting, or could have a cafe that looks like a cafeteria. And because one scores higher on a prospect refuge index, then people are going to prefer that one. So what they did is they took a photo of two cafes, where one scores higher than the other on these prospect refuge metrics. And then they wanted to see whether the people would be more likely to purchase items, spend money, stay longer, how their mood would be as a function of whether they were at one or the other cafe. So there you go. Now notice that all of these projects are really at the intersection of evolutionary psychology and consumer behavior. Precisely because the course is understanding our consuming instinct. So it is the application of evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology, in this case, to consumer behavior. The sixth group looked at the susceptibility to online reviews. Some of us are very much keen to pay attention to online reviews, whereas others are not. And so they wanted to look at what are some correlates of one's susceptibility to online reviews, and they linked it to three traits from the Big Five, and also to a leadership trait as well. And so the idea is, for example, if you are more of a leader, are you less likely to be susceptible to online reviews and so on? And they offered some interesting links to how their project would be, linked to evolutionary theory. For example, they cited a paper by some folks whom I know well, Price and Van Vogt, who have looked at leader-follower dynamics from an evolutionary perspective. So that was the 6th project. And then finally, the 7th project, they looked at how priming people, either for survival or in this case, or in their case, their second prime was a kin/reproduction prime, how that has an effect on various phenomena related to, wanting something now or being willing to wait for later. So in a sense, it's similar to, I think I've probably talked about this. I think in a former Sad Truth clip, I discussed this idea of future discounting or immediate versus delayed gratification. And so here what they were looking at is how does an evolutionary prime, so by putting you in a particular mindset, how that affects the manner by which you tackle decisions that are temporally based, which by the way is very much linked to, I had applied for a grant back in 2014, a research grant, and one of the projects that I was planning on doing within that grant is to look at various evolutionary primes and their downstream effect in various consumer settings. As a matter of fact, I did a study with one of my former doctoral students, Eric Stenstrom. That paper is not yet published, where we looked at baby primes. So what we did is we manipulated, we either exposed people to photos of babies or some other control condition, and then looked at their proclivity to engage in conspicuous consumption, risk-taking, and so on. And then in the second study, instead of exposing them visually to baby primes, we actually had them either listen to babies, either crying or sort of laughing, or listening to a control condition, say music, and then looking at how that affects various downstream variables from consumer behavior. The results, frankly, were quite mixed. That's one of the challenges that we're facing right now is, how to position this paper. We might collect more data, so we'll see what happens. But in any case, this gives you a bit of a sense of the broad range of topics that are covered in my courses. And I think one of the things that makes it fun for me when I teach this course, it's always fun to teach the material because, as you all know, I'm very passionate about evolutionary psychology and consumer psychology and psychology of decision making and so on. That always holds true, but I've taught it many times before. What the novelty that is introduced from the student's perspective is that they end up ultimately coming up with different projects every semester, and so that keeps it certainly fun and fresh. So there you have it. The semester is over. I will be sure to share this clip with my students in their honor. And if any of you are thinking of studying how evolutionary psychology and biology could be applied in business settings, and in my case, I apply it largely in consumer behavior, apply to the John Molson School of Business, one of the top business schools in the world, in a great city. A bit cold, I must admit. It is now getting colder and darker in Montreal. But the good news is that we get to then appreciate the summers more when we go through the hell of winter. So there you have it, folks. I want to thank my students for a great semester, and I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.